Hello again. Welcome to another writing live stream. I'm Bryan Young, and we're going to be talking about some writing stuff. Obviously, quickly before we get into that, I just want to say if you haven't had a chance to check out my Patreon, which is where I'm going to be putting up short stories where you can support me directly as a writer, you can do that at patreon.com/swankmotron. So we've got two questions right off the bat, and if you have any questions during the course of this, please post them in the comments. If you're watching it live, I'll try to get to them while we're on the video. If you're not watching it live, I'll try to save them for the next session. So the first question was about tips about writing work for National Novel Writing Month. July 1st, which is today, kicks off Camp NaNoWriMo, which is the sort of the second summer version of trying to get 50,000 words, or with Camp, I guess you can alter that goal so that you're working in a camp of people to reach a writing goal. As far as word count or whatever, they divide you into what they call cabins, and there's like 10 or 12 people in there, and you can help encourage each other to do that. I think talking with the people in your camp is one thing that you can do to encourage yourself to get through that. Having other people goad you on is something that's really important. As far as getting through Camp NaNoWriMo or National Novel Writing Month in general, I think the biggest thing to remember is try to hit daily goals rather than a monthly goal. Figure out how many words it's going to take per day to get to the goal you have in mind, but don't worry so much about the end of the month goal, and don't feel like if you're so far behind that you can't catch up. It's better to, say you missed the first week and then you feel like you're a week behind. It's still better to get that 30,000 words with those 3 weeks than it would be to not get anything at all. And sometimes I get behind on my word count on there as well, and it's just a matter of trying to pick it back up and outlining. I think having an outline ready before Novel Writing Month starts is really important, because every time you get stuck, it makes it really easy for you to just fall back on that, and that's I think a really important part of learning how to write a novel. I mean, for me, I think National Novel Writing Month, it did two things for me. One, it encouraged me to get a set amount of words done in a month, kind of in the first time. And B, it encouraged me to be writing every day. So even if you don't make your goal, as long as it's helping you instill good writing habits, then it's a really good thing. And so, part of my advice for finishing that is just to use it to pick up good writing habits. And if, I'm not sure, I think that's the biggest thing, really, because you're just trying to get words down. You're just trying to get, something in order so that you can revise later, right? It's, the artist equivalent of if you're a sculptor, right? You need to pick the right block of marble before you can start chipping into it. And what you're doing with National Novel Writing Month is picking, all the words that you're putting down is filling up that block of marble so that when you're revising, you can start chipping at it a lot easier. And if you don't have that block of marble, you're not going to have a finished story later. And with Novel Writing Month, I think one of the other big important things is the same thing you need to tell every writer, right? The idea that it doesn't matter what the prose looks like in that first draft. Your goal is to get a draft together. You need to turn that inner editor off. You need to tell yourself that it doesn't matter if everything you're writing is crap. I mean, I've been through so many rough drafts, and as I've been writing, saying, this is crap, but I'll fix it later. And because I have something in the first place, it means I really will fix it later. So I think the biggest takeaway is do it every day. Don't stress out about whether or not you're meeting the goals. Just do your best to try to hit them, and turn off that inner editor so you can work as quickly as you can from an outline. So those are the sorts of tips I have for National Novel Writing Month. The next question is, do I use specific archetypes from like the hero's journey on purpose, or is it something you stumble into? And I think it's kind of both. The thing about the hero's journey, the thing about the Hero of a Thousand Faces and the archetypes that Joseph Campbell lays out in his work, is the fact that they sort of cover every sort of character. You know, you think of the hero's journey and you think of Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, but he's not the only archetypical character from the hero's journey in there. Obi-Wan Kenobi is that wizened old swords master who passes on the knowledge and sacrifices himself to help Luke on his way. That's an archetype. Han Solo's an archetype where he's the hero who doesn't know he's the hero yet, right? So he's the scoundrel who is only in it for himself until he discovers that he's not in it for just himself and that he actually has things to contribute again. You know, you go down the line and it's just Campbell was able to distill just what characters are supposed to do. So if you wrote your story and then went back and looked at all of the archetypes that Campbell put together, what you're going to find is that most of your characters line up to some of those ideas. If you're telling, you know, the sort of story where you have a character who has that refusal to the call to action and then changes immeasurably after slaying whatever demon that is inside themselves or slaying that dragon by the end of the movie, right? You're going to have those archetypes in your story, whether you plan to or not, because they're just universal truths of storytelling. They're not rules per se, but they're principles of storytelling, and he cultivated those from years and years and years of just taking in stories. So you're going to stumble upon them whether you mean to or not, and it might even be better to not sit and read what those Hero of a Thousand Faces sort of archetypes are, so that you're not trying to put your characters into these really specific forms. You know, it's very easy to get caught up. Like I said last week when we were talking about the hero's journey, it's really easy to get lost in the idea that you're using this as a series of checkboxes for your writing or for your story. The same is true of characters and the traits in the archetypes, right? If you have an idea for a Han Solo sort of character, and then you start reading about all of the things traditionally in myth that deal with that scoundrel with the heart of gold sort of archetype, then your character is going to seem stilted because you're not actually building a character. You're building something that's based on an archetype, and that's just not going to do your writing any good. So again, same thing. Use those archetypes for individual characters and for your story in general, more as a menu than a checklist, because it'll seem weird and people will recognize it. You know, if you go back and read, it's really interesting. If you've taken in all of the hero's journey stuff, when it came out in 1977, Terry Brooks's sort of Shannara. And yes, it's pronounced Shannara because I was on stage with him and he corrected me about that, and I was moderating the panel. It was very embarrassing. If you go through and read the Sword of Shannara from 1977, everything is that sort of Joseph Campbell archetype, right? And now it seems a little dated because it follows that menu. It follows that checklist so perfectly with all of the characters and the story that it feels like you know exactly what's going to happen, you know exactly how things are going to turn out, because these characters, we've seen them on the paths from Star Wars, we've seen them on the path from Lord of the Rings, and we've seen sort of that mixture and combination. Not to say that Terry Brooks copied Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, although he was certainly inspired by Lord of the Rings, but that now to today's audience, because they're so inculcated to that style of storytelling, it feels like it's predictable. There's nothing fresh about it. And that's what was so inspiring about what George Lucas had done with Star Wars, in that he kind of reawakened that in people. But if you get too close to what he'd done in Star Wars, people are going to point at it and say, hey, what you're doing is what George Lucas did in Star Wars. It doesn't matter that what George Lucas did in Star Wars, he'd been aping from all of recorded, all of the stories in recorded history. What mattered is that people had seen it and it had awakened that idea in their mind the most in Star Wars. So, not to say you can't borrow elements from Star Wars. There's so many things that do borrow elements from Star Wars, and they do it in really fresh and interesting ways. Guardians of the Galaxy felt like a breath of fresh air, and it felt so Star Warsy right off the bat. It was pretty amazing, and we've had lots of copycats over the years. It was interesting with John Carter, the movie. The John Carter books are where George Lucas went to for inspiration for Star Wars in the first place, and those books came out in the 19-teens. And what happened was, when the John Carter movie came out, people said, oh, this is like Star Wars, but it's actually the other way around. It was the original, and Star Wars just sort of borrowed those archetypical elements from it. Which, and don't take that away from John Carter. It's actually a really great movie. Yeah, so that's what I would say as far as the characters go. So we've got a question here. And Anna writes, are there any non-traditional heroes' journeys you'd recommend to see how they play with the archetypes and themes? Trying to think off the top of my head, non-traditional heroes' journeys. I think there's elements, like anything that doesn't follow that strict pattern is a little bit of a non-traditional hero's journey. I'm trying to think, like, Harry Potter's hero's journey is a little bit non-traditional, where he does have the orphaned parents, and he's in that situation where he doesn't know he's special, and someone arrives to tell him that he really is, but there's no, like, Harry doesn't, not in that first book, Harry doesn't need to say, like, no, I don't want to go be a wizard, that'd be silly. So even in those small ways, it's non-traditional. If you look at, I guess you'd have to look at anti-heroes, which is where you'd look at for non-traditional. So, like, Deadpool would be an anti-hero. Deadpool is a character who's not heeding some call to adventure to slay a dragon with him. It's purely a revenge plot. And that's just a movie I've thought about recently. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade has a non-traditional hero's journey where you don't typically think about it, because Indiana Jones isn't going to refuse that adventure. But it's not just the refusal of the adventure, it is that he has to change. But his change isn't necessarily within himself, it's within his relationship with his father. Let me get back on that one. Let me look into that and think a little deeper. I'm kind of on the spot with that one, because I'd really like to come up with a better answer for you, because there's lots of them that I could think of. So unless there's any other questions, that's probably it for today. If you want to find my writing, you could do so at bryanyoungfiction.com, or like me on Facebook, and you can keep up with my writing. I've got some new pieces out this week, recently. If you would be so kind as to support my Patreon, where you can get short stories from me every month for as little as $1 per short story, and that's just going to keep me writing and help me subsidize these videos for you guys as well. And that's just patreon.com/swankmotron. Or you can follow me on Twitter, which is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me or to ask questions, and that's just twitter.com/swankmotron. So that's @swankmotron. So thank you for tuning in this week, and not being terribly bored, hopefully, by what I had to say. Keep writing. And if you haven't gotten into National Novel Writing Month, I don't think it's too late to sign up this year still. It starts today. It's a great way to kick yourself in the ass to get some writing done this month. So, like I said, keep writing.